Let me give you a real quick timeline of how I ended up in front of you this evening. March 8th of 2016, our son Taylor was in Israel. He was in the MBA program at Vanderbilt University on a school-related trip to interact with Israeli companies, also to learn about the culture and learn about the people of Israel. I was at home in Charleston, South Carolina, walking to my car in a parking lot not too far from our home. My cell phone rang. I answered it. Didn't recognize the phone number. The female voice said, "This is Chaplain Gretchen from Vanderbilt University. I'm on speakerphone with the Chancellor of the University and the Dean of the Graduate School." And I knew this wasn't going to be a very good phone call. She proceeded to tell me that there had been a terrorist attack in Jaffa. 11 people strolling on the boardwalk had been stabbed. And she said that Taylor was stabbed and was transported by ambulance to the hospital, but he didn't make it. I asked the first obvious question, "Are you sure it was Taylor?" And she said, "Yes, his professor is sure it was Taylor." And I said, "Did you call home? Have you talked to my wife?" She said, "No, you're the emergency contact." I said, that's Taylor. He's responsible, knowing that I would be the one to call if there was a problem. So I asked the chaplain, "Do not call home. Do not contact anybody until I have a chance to tell my wife." I drove home, did the hardest thing I've ever done. I will admit that to anyone and everyone, to tell my wife that our 28-year-old son had been murdered. A little while later, when we composed ourselves, we said, we need to make another phone call. Call our daughter, Kristen, in New York City. She lived and worked there at the time. That was the second hardest call I've ever made. Tell her that her brother, her best friend in the world, Taylor, had been murdered. 2 months later, roughly 2 months later, we got an email from Sander expressing his deepest sympathy and asking if we'd like to know more about the circumstances of the attack. I said I would like to, and he forwarded the laws, a PDF document of the laws that that put the money amounts for rewarding the terrorists. He also sent the video of the Palestinians celebrate our son's murder and the proclamation of his killer as a martyr for the Palestinian youth. Since then, we have been connected with Senator Lindsey Graham, who sponsored the legislation in the Senate, and Representative Doug Lamborn in Colorado, who sponsored the legislation in the House. As Sandra said, it's been passed in the House. We're just waiting for the Senate to take it up, vote on the floor, and have the senators show us where they stand. So for the past year and a half, my wife and I have been talking, doing interviews, telling them about our son, which we love to do, and also stumping for the Taylor Force Act. There are a couple of questions that come up, two of them usually. First one, what was Taylor like? And in trying to describe somebody using the adjectives, that doesn't work, so I always use the comparison with the table with the glass half full of water in it. The pessimist says the glass is half empty. The optimist says the glass is half full. Engineer will tell you, of course, that the glass is twice as big as it needs to be. But Taylor's glass, it wasn't a glass, it was a barrel, and it was full of life, and he shared that with everybody. It was always full. He never met a stranger. He was concerned more about other people than himself. He had attended a summer camp, and the motto of the summer camp was God first, others second, yourself last. And that's the way Taylor lived his life. The other question I get, thank you, and that is true. The other question I get frequently is, why was Taylor in Israel? you know, have you been to Israel? Has your family? And I said, no, Taylor's the first one that's been to Israel. And the short answer is he was there for grad school trip, but there were really two reasons. One of his best friends, Josh Halu, is Jewish, and Taylor had been over to their Shabbat dinner several times. He enjoyed it. He enjoyed the traditions. Of course, he enjoyed the food and the wine, but it affected him very deeply. The second reason was that he took a solo trip between his Army commitment and grad school to Europe, and one of his side trips, he took the train to Krakow. And the next day, he got up and took a 2-hour bus tour to Auschwitz. And he sat next to a lady who contacted us when she saw on Facebook that we had lost Taylor, and she told us what a wonderful young man he was and how the conversation was very quiet and subdued on the way back. So I know both of those times affected Taylor, and that's the reason he applied for it and was accepted for that trip to go to Israel. Somebody said after one of the talks that I gave, I think it was at the Young Israel Congregation of Scarsdale, I don't know, somebody else was driving, it was dark, and I wasn't really following the road too well. But she came up and told me after I made some remarks saying how comforting the Israeli community, the people from Israel and the Jewish community in the States, in Canada and Israel had been so comforting for the Force family during this whole ordeal. And she came up afterwards and she said, Mr. Force, that's what we do. We comfort people. We've been doing it a long time, and we're very, very good at it. And she's right. You're very good at it. Somebody else came up one time and said, I'm so sorry, your son must have been in the wrong place at the wrong time. I corrected him. I said, no, he was in the right place at the right time. He was doing what he wanted to do. He was learning about Israel and the Jewish culture. The terrorist was in the wrong place at the wrong time. There is no there's no right place for terrorism. There's no right time for terrorism. Anywhere, Israel, the United States, France, any country that cherishes freedom and liberty and human rights, that is just not right. And that's why we are involved in getting this legislation passed. We are hoping that by passing it and helping the situation in Israel, that maybe other countries that don't watch where their money goes will stop the money that goes to these regimes that send their money and fund terrorism. I'd like to close with on the family calendar, any celebrations are pretty subdued. Anniversaries, birthdays, religious holidays, national holidays, they're all just they're not as fun anymore. There are 2 days that we do treasure highly. One is June 21st, Taylor's birthday. We always have a cheeseburger and a glass of bourbon because that was his favorite food and beverage. The second day is March 8th, when we lost Taylor. We're hoping to add a third day to that, and hoping to add it soon, where we'll celebrate going to Washington, D.C., to the White House, and watch President Trump sign the Taylor Force Act. Thank you.